Hello, and welcome to this episode of Ruckcast. Ruckcast is your opportunity to listen in on unscripted conversations about cutting-edge Ruckus Wi-Fi and wired networking technology, Ruckus business, and just interesting innovations that impact the computer networking industry today and in the future. Ruckcast is brought to you directly from CommScope Ruckus Education. For more learning opportunities, be sure to log on to training.ruckuswireless.com and view content on our Ruckus Education YouTube channel. Simply search for Ruckus Education on your YouTube homepage. Without further ado, here's your host, Matt Clouda.
Brian Stewart, my friend and confidant. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good. How about yourself, man?
Doing good. So we're going to talk about something pretty fun today, aren't we?
Yeah, yep.
So for anybody that's been paying attention, we've been doing some live streams on YouTube just surrounding different Ruckus products, and we're kind of working through the product family right now. And in typical fashion, you were able to sit down and put together some live stream collateral that we use for overlays that look amazing. First of all, I mean, everybody that's seen them has complimented them, and myself in typical fashion just swooped in like a vulture and ran with them and started using them. So that was quite the adventure, but yeah, everything looks great. I mean, I think you did an amazing job, and it's worked out really, really well. So thank you for that.
Absolutely, and thank you. Now, it's been kind of an interesting journey because, and it all kind of started out with you involved as well, because it started out just over a year ago when we were both out in Costa Rica doing a delivery. I finally had kind of a breakthrough because you and I, for those that are listening, both Matt and myself do gaming, on the side, and we both have tended to watch, live streamers online. And for some time, I'd been kind of thinking, it's like, I really want to take a lot of the elements that they're using, the visual overlays of their own video directly on top of their game, or in this case, on top of educational content, and really feed that into how we deliver classes remotely.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that too, because when we were sitting there, I remember there were aspects of getting those overlays to work. And if you look at, version 1's always a little rough, right? But looking at what was being put together, and you were having to fight with aspects of it. But you're right. I think we both have a penchant for wanting to make sure that it's done right, clean, it looks good, and you watch some streams and they're terrible. And I'm not going to drop names, but I've seen some science and technology streams for companies that are streaming content. And look, I get we're in the middle of a pandemic and everybody's home, but they don't look visually aesthetic compared to what you've put. So I think from that regard, you deserve a pat on the back because you made it look really, really clean, and the transitions are awesome and everything. It looks really good.
Well, and I think that I think the pandemic and a lot of those things kind of feed into this because it has kind of forced a lot of companies into this, and it's put us in a good position because, we had no foresight of this, a year and 2 months ago when we started down this road, so initially it was just, hey, these are things that could definitely enrich our remote class deliveries, and I think we're reaching a point where even without COVID-19 happening, we're getting to this stage where whether you're going into a tool like Zoom or Adobe Connect or GoToTraining or BlueJeans or whatever it is, and you're presenting to an audience, whether that is a marketing presentation or whether that is training, whatever that happens to be, we're getting to the stage where it's no longer acceptable to just throw up PowerPoint slides and just talk over the top of them. That you've got to have the ability to, whether it is to annotate and mark those up in real time, the ability to insert your video directly on top of it so that they see you interacting more with that audience, which, yes, you can do that natively in some of those platforms, but usually your video is like a separate little box somewhere else. So you're pulling people's attention away from those slides, away from that information that you're trying to present to that audience. And if you look at the evolution of game streaming, so if you looked at game streams 6-7 years ago, the bulk of them were someone that was on, let's say they were on a PS4 or even a PS3, and they were just using the little camera that connects up to that, and they were live streaming it. So they didn't have like these overlays and this polish and everything like that. And as that industry has evolved, you can't really make it in that industry anymore just throwing up the little cam that attaches to your console and just calling it good. That the bar has significantly raised. And I think so we had a little bit of a head start in that we started going down this road before a lot of others were forced to do so. But I think even before the pandemic happened, it was one of those things that was obvious that, the generation that is growing up with this, that their expectations are very different, that they expect that type of, what would look like a professional news broadcast kind of thing for, live content that they are consuming, because that's what they're getting now through these streaming engines. And it's not just a small niche group, which it was like 6, 7, 8 years ago. Last quarter, I think Twitch had over 5 billion hours of watch time last quarter alone.
Woo.
And I think that equated to it was about 2.5 million average viewers. So, I mean, that includes like a Wednesday at 2:00 in the morning. That's not, peak time, prime time. That's average viewers over that window. If you take all of streaming as a whole, then I think in Q2 of this year, it was more like 8.5 billion hours of watch time that took place. So, I mean, this is being heavily consumed, and with it, the expectations of what live presentations that are being done remotely, what those should look like, those expectations are raising accordingly.
Oh, yeah. And, some of the things we've looked at too, so we've been having fun with audio routing lately, right? And I've drug you into that because it's something interesting. But then we start looking for hardware. You need a decent webcam that's not a pile of garbage. And then you have an audio interface that's giving you fits. So, well, I need to replace it. And you go look for the hardware, and you can tell that there's a huge uptick in it right now because you can't find hardware. Yeah. It's gone.
Yep.
And so one thing I kind of noticed too was one of my kids watches streaming on Twitch, and something I've learned with him, just kind of watching how he watches it, is he's more watching it for the content creator. So he's more interested in what whoever he's watching is doing and saying. I mean, he might learn aspects about the game that he's playing. And that's a 10-year-old's brain, right? I mean, he's just being entertained by somebody that's playing a game that he likes. I would look at it differently. So we had conversations amongst my group of friends here, and we were playing a lot of Diablo 3, and everybody got bored. So we said, well, my buddy Tom found Grim Dawn. So we started playing that, and obviously I'm an ARPG guy. And so as we started dragging some of our other D3 friends into it, they were like, well, are there any streamers I can watch to kind of get a feel for it? And that's when I told them, I said, you know what? I've looked for them, and they're not that good. They're just really not. And I realized that I am falling into that same category to where if I need to learn about it to a certain extent, because the game's like 10 years old or 5 years old, however old it is. I don't need to reinvent the wheel and bang my head against the wall to refigure it out. You can learn things from those people, but if you're not entertained, then you're not really interested in sitting there watching it. And then I turned around and flipped that again into what we're doing, and I thought, okay, it's going to be a lot of the same thing. And I'm not saying I'm entertaining. That's not at all what I'm doing. But the type of stuff that we're doing, you're focusing solely on content, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's, and I look at it this way, I mean, some of the big things that are streamed, like Fortnite or World of Warcraft, things like that, it's the game itself until an expansion comes out or a patch or a release, it's pretty much rinse and repeat. But for content-driven stuff that we're doing, it really focuses on the content that you're putting forward and putting out there. And so I think with that piece, we have it a little bit easier because we're getting that balance in there. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's fun. So one thing we had talked about too was what platform to use. I know there's a lot of up and down, back and forth debate on that because look at, you can stream this in a multitude of places, but
Oh
what
yeah.
is the real intent behind it? And we didn't settle, but we decided on YouTube for many reasons. Number one, you get a VOD out of it. So it records the session, it leaves it on your channel. You can put it in whatever playlist you want. You can add chapter markers, you can keep it. And I think that was probably a super smart decision, not only because of the VOD piece, but also because anybody can get to it. It doesn't matter who they are. They can jump on YouTube, they can join it and be like, oh, cool, I didn't know that you could do that. You know what I mean?
Well, and one other big thing with that too is yourself and our overall curriculum development team have created an immense amount of amazing content that's already out there in YouTube as part of the Ruckus Education channel. So having more of a centralized location to where people have already found that, looking for information on Ruckus, or people that may come in looking for, information on how to do a specific action in Smart Zone, or, how to change a specific setting on their ICX. Now they're also going to see, hey, there's a live stream coming up next week. So both those things kind of tend to feed each other, so people can make it in and get that newer real-time content coming out of the live stream, and also discover this whole repository of information that's already there. That, for example, many people listening to this podcast, they may be listening to it on, Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or Spotify, and may not be aware of all the content we've got out on YouTube. So kind of having these things feed each other a bit helps our customer base and our partners, and even our employees for that matter, find where a lot of this great content lives and breathes. So, yep.
Yeah, and the interesting thing with that too is that content isn't just the concept and the creation of it isn't pulled out of thin air. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of care and feeding and thought that goes into it. So if you look at the how-to playlist, that was a large project internally with a lot of people involved, where you look at the video and you get a 5-minute video and you're like, oh, that's great. Now I understand, LDAP authentication with Zone Director. Well, what they don't realize is or they may realize it, is that 5-minute video, the recording was an hour and a half. And even before the recording started, there were hundreds of man hours put in by support staff and, by some of our metrics people to look at it and say, hey, these are the things that we're seeing trends on that we need to focus on. So we're really trying to hit a mark on that target to say, this is what's missing out there where people can access this information. And it's not an intent to turn around and say, don't call support, we don't want to talk to you. It's, you're in a hurry, you need to get something going, or you're planning for something. Here's some content that can help you get going.
Yeah.
And then we're also tying that into the live stream piece as well, to where, hey, we need, we're seeing an uptick in this content that exists out there, or we're seeing an uptick in support case volume. What other things can we do to help get information out to the user base and to our customer base and our partners, and say, here's some additional information for you. So hopefully that trending is helping, and it's, it's starting to get out there to where people see it and they're like, oh, because I know last stream it was very interactive, which was great to see.
Yep. Well, and different peoples consume that content in different manners. There are people that their preference is going to be to go out and look through a YouTube video. There are people that their preference is going to be to go out and get a quick document that they can go through. Some people it's going to be the full-on user guide. Some people it'll be an in-classroom experience, which would probably be remotely delivered based on, current conditions that are taking place, but people have different requirements there. And especially with those conditions right now, that capability of the live stream to have that real-time interaction with, a person directly from the company, and be able to interact back and forth is a big benefit. And, it's something that I see, and you've mentioned that there are other companies that are playing in the space, and we won't say exactly who necessarily, because they're doing it to lesser, or better degrees, depending on the company. But one thing I've seen a lot is, and I you were specifically talking about tech companies that are doing live streams.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of other companies, and again, I won't mention names here because I'm going to say something that is a little bit denigrating about their product. But there are companies that are websites that specialize in, education media, and in, offering classes that have been, designed to go out and have people go through those classes. And there's a number of them that are doing it well, but, pretty much all of that content is all, it's all pre-recorded. It's all predefined content, but you can tell that there is a desire out there in the community very heavily for content that is real time and is live. Because most of those sites, if you go through and say, I want to take a class in Perl, or I want to take a class in JavaScript, or I want to take a class in whatever that happens to be, you pull up a listing of those classes, and on some of those sites, it'll have right next to it, like, class starts, and it'll show you today's date or tomorrow's date, because they want to make it appear as a live real-time event, even though it's all pre-recorded and there is no start date, because it's just a series of videos and exercises.
Yep.
But they want to put that front out there, and there's even one, and we can talk about this offline later. I'll divulge who it is, but I won't divulge who it is on recording. But there's a fairly large website that specializes explicitly in streaming classes, and you go to their website, and right at the top it has like, a live now button. You click on the live now button, it says, on air today, and it shows this whole listing of classes that are currently on the air, and it shows, upcoming days, what classes are going to be live and what day and time and everything else. And they're all pre-recorded video.
Ugh.
That they're making this whole thing because there is the desire out there, that they want someone to, interact with, a specialist that is there to kind of guide them through that. And if they do have a question, to be able to say, hey, what about this? But there's just not many groups out there that are feeding that desire right now, so.
Yeah. And so here's a good example of that, right? This is why I wouldn't be necessarily a fan. And I think a lot of people wouldn't. But the same week we were in Costa Rica, right, we were talking about lags on an ICX and how traffic is handled across those lags because you have 4 links. Well, the switch has to spread that traffic across those 4 links. How does that work? If you're watching a pre-recording and somebody's saying, well, traffic is hashed across these links and it's based off of source and destination IP and source and destination MAC address. Great. And then you get somebody that's curiously minded and says, well, wait a second, hold on. How does that hash work? You can't do that. There's no interaction there to say, oh, good point. Let me pull a whiteboard up and show you exactly how this works and how it breaks everything down and to make sure that you're splitting traffic evenly between 4 links and you make it make sense. You can't do that.
Absolutely.
And I mean, look, here's the thing. Anybody and everybody right now in the world we live in can pick up a platform and start streaming content.
Yeah.
Piece of cake. If you have content to talk about, if you have something to put out there, you can. Now, the challenge with that becomes not everybody in the world was graced with the personality and the mentality and the skills and the experience of the Brian Stewarts of the world, where you can stand up in front of a room full of 500 people and speak comfortably, right? Or stick a camera in your face and speak to content there comfortably. Not everybody has that ability. So that's another challenge with it. But looking at how all of this is being broke out and what this really brings to the table, that interaction piece, because you hit it right on the head. And we've had multiple conversations about this. Everybody learns differently. Everybody. It doesn't matter. And so opening that door up to kind of provide for all of that, really, really helps. And just the collateral that you've built and we're utilizing allows for all of that. You know what I mean? I mean, it really does.
And whether it is a live stream or a remotely delivered class, I mean, in addition to kind of those tools, you have to keep interacting with that audience and keep interacting with their brains. You can't just go through and fully just, kind of lecture your way through something like you're reading a book. Regardless of how dynamic you are in that process, you've got to say, okay, what would happen if we change this parameter and why? You have to keep the brain engaged throughout that process. And, whether it's live streams or whether it's virtual classes, ask yes, no questions, get people to respond in chat, keep people engaged there, because it's too easy whenever you're dealing with, whether it's, whether it is recorded content or whether it is live generated content, it becomes way too easy in our world to be like, oh, ding, I just heard I got an email, and that temptation of going over, looking to seeing what it is, and, oh, okay, well, that's something I really should respond to right now, even though I'm, taking, going through a learning video or in a virtual or remote classroom. It becomes much easier for those distractions to take place than it would be in a physical lecture type environment. And by continuing to interact with that audience, and they know you're going to be asking them questions, they're not as tempted to draw their attention elsewhere and to kind of go off down other rabbit holes and kind of lose their place and lose foundational information that they're not going to be able to build on throughout the rest of that live stream or the rest of that offering.
You're exactly right. So we talked about this a little bit yesterday, and this is, again, we've been having a lot of internal discussion about this, and I think I answered this question, and like the jerk that I am, I never asked you this question. I think it's a little loaded anyways, but how do you learn? when you sit down and you are looking at educational content that you either need to take, want to take, whatever, how do you learn? What's the best way for you?
It's a mixture. I find that I learn best through kind of a series of three. I will start with like a written guide type of thing, and go from that into hands-on and into, kind of why is it working the way it is? That's always the most important key factor for me, is not what it does, but why it does it. Because if I understand why it does something, then I know how to shift it and how to change it. And then it becomes, okay, who are my resources and mentors that I can go to, if it's not clicking, if it's not making sense, and whether that is reaching out to someone within a live stream or taking a class or reaching out to someone directly, that kind of becomes that next stage of that process from my perspective. So it takes a lot of those different elements together. So, yeah.
That makes sense. Well, and that's the thing, right? You have to accommodate that kind of thing. And that's what we're talking about. You start to accommodate those different levels of it in different delivery methods, I guess you could call it.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So,
yeah. And you can't build, you don't build a house out of just one material, that, you've got a different kind of thing that you use to build your structural walls versus the drywall you're going to put over the top of it versus the material you're going to have for roofing to keep water from getting into it, that building a whole strategy around only one type of delivery, your house is going to fall down because it's not going to meet the needs of all of your audience. So you've got to have kind of those different routes and paths to learning, because some people may heavily prefer one overall path and use that path almost exclusively. Some people like myself may do multiple paths as their preference, but you've got to kind of fit all of those needs to really make sure that your audience is enabled to be able to use your product successfully. So.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Yeah. And I do see kind of, and this is, so now we're going to go from some of the things that we're doing right now. And I think we're doing very well in, and we're kind of, we're kind of, doing some groundbreaking things in a lot of these areas. But, kind of since you asked me like my learning preference and stuff like that, a couple things that I would love to see, but we're probably quite a ways away from, is like, 20 years ago, and I'll take it back to gaming, because that's where this nugget started in my head, when Half-Life came out. And when they started making mods for Half-Life, I looked at that, and one of my initial thoughts was, I would love to see like basically a full university campus built up within, basically a game environment, a game world where you got different buildings for, whether that's different product portfolios or different types of skill sets. And you go into that, and in those buildings, you have, rooms and areas that you do hands-on, that you do, like video type of content, self-paced content, and virtual lecture halls. and all that exists within that overall virtual space. And of course, like an idiot in 1999, I'm looking at this saying, I think we're 10 years away from making that happen. Well, okay, maybe not so much. But again, going back to the earlier part of the conversation where I'm saying, the younger generation now that's growing up on things like Twitch and YouTube gaming and Facebook gaming, their expectations have changed significantly based on that. You got kids.
Mm-hmm.
So for the sake of the audience, how old are your kids?
10 and 12.
10 and 12. Okay. So are you familiar at all with, and I will mention these names because I'm going to give them a lot of praise. So I will mention these names. Have you ever heard of ABC Mouse or Adventure Academy?
Yep, both. Yeah.
So, ABC Mouse came out several years ago and is really focused at, preschool through roughly, 7-8 years old. So it's a very, young child kind of interface. But what they were finding was they wanted to take the kids that grew up with ABC Mouse and with learning, initially to spell and to read and, learning a lot of those things from ABC Mouse. They wanted to take them into a later version of that. So they created Adventure Academy, maybe what has been 2 years ago now, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it is this virtual world with a virtual university where you have different areas for, one for science, one for, one for English and literature, one for math. And so you go to these different areas for different types of learning activities. To me, like the one piece that is missing there currently is that live component. You have live interaction with other learners, which is incredibly valuable there, but you don't have like a virtual lecture hall because, again, this is really geared towards now 9 through 13, but I think that they're going to find themselves in that same position in about 5 years as the people that they moved from ABC Mouse into Adventure Academy. As they kind of age out of Adventure Academy, they're going to want to keep that audience going. And I think that may feed into one which would adapt well to like corporate and university level education and would have, things like a virtual lecture hall where you can have a live lecture event that takes place inside that environment, and I mean, there's concerts going on in, MMOs and other online games that they're having live concerts in the game, so we're seeing this melding of worlds. And I think not only is that going to be of value for just how education can be consumed, but it also tends to really envelop you in that world, and you're not as likely to have those distractions kind of pull you out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And even more so to take it to the next level, if that's implemented in a VR context,
Yeah.
Because I think we're reaching a point and a stage where, and this is you're gonna think I'm crazy when I say this, but it won't be the first time you've thought that. That I think we're going to see VR starting to become an escape from the kind of oppressive digital world that we're in. So we're going to go into a digital world to escape our digital world.
Exactly. Yeah.
That, every moment of the day now, you may be, you're in front of a laptop, possibly with a tablet beside it and your phone, and you got notifications hitting everywhere. You've got, whether it's calls and virtual meetings and everything that's taking place, we're just inundated with all of this. And some of the things that are becoming quite popular in VR is basically like laying back on a beach, or on a beach, sorry, not in a beach, laying back on a beach in a VR environment and relaxing and getting away from that. And I think the ability, whether it is for just meetings that you can have, but be productive because you don't have so many different things coming at you, to have that more in an augmented and virtual reality type of environment. And so that could be for meetings, conferences, education, any of the above. And I think that will become an emerging trend. And, like an idiot, I'm going to stand here and say, yeah, we're probably about 10 years away from that really hitting very well. We'll see, we'll see if I'm any closer with that one than I was the last time. So yeah.
Well, I mean, it's better to be off by 10 years than 30. So
Yeah, fair enough.
And it's interesting too, because when you think about that, of course, this is always one of the things I enjoy most about these conversations with you, is because you have a 4-dimensional brain and it pulls me into this world, and then somehow my ADHD brain takes me right back to being 12, and I think about, if you look at that environment and you go to the science building and you can do science experiments, well, now you can do all these different science experiments, and you can actually allow kids or students or whoever to try these different combinations and screw something up. And even though the explosion happens, it doesn't kill anybody or burn the building down. It just teaches you that this chemical does not go with this chemical. Please don't mix them together anymore.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, and coming from our world, one of the things I would love to see would be like, okay, if you have this VR environment where you've got let's call it a virtual Ruckus campus, and you've got a building for ICX, you've got a building for Cloud Path and onboarding. You've got a building for Smart Zone and controllers. That one of the actions that you can do in this is design and cable the network for it. And so you're designing and cabling the network in that virtual environment. And if it breaks, that it breaks, but you didn't do that in a real campus.
Right.
You can go out and deploy virtual APs and walk around with a virtual tablet or virtual cell phone in your hand within that environment and be impacted by things like, how much of the signal is going to make it through that virtual wall to the other side, and see a lot of the, how you're going to design properly, but do it all within that virtual space that you can walk around with from a VR and AR perspective. So,
yeah, because when you think about it, and this is the interesting part. Well, it was interesting to me because I thought it was really smart of me to think of this, but it's already been thought of 1,000 times. You take people like ourselves, right? We've been doing this for a while. So we know what the switch looks like. We know how the port layouts work. We know how stacking works. We've physically touched them, installed them, replaced them. But then there's this huge demographic of folks that are coming up, finding interest in this. And then when they sit down and they say, well, there's this class, I'm going to go take it, regardless of the delivery method, they're taking a class and looking at this stuff and learning it. They've never physically touched a box.
Yeah.
And so that enables that with, you don't have to have a stack of hardware in a room. You've got somebody that's sitting there looking at it. Yeah. I mean, it makes a ton of sense because there's something to be said that you can manage a network and build a switch out without having to physically touch one. Are you a little bit more well-versed in it if you have physically touched it, seen it, know what it's doing? Yes. I mean, it's not just about the software configuration in it. It's also about understanding the hardware itself. And so there's a lot to be said with that.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, when you start talking about how you would care for something like a goldfish, people are going to relate to that. They're going to understand that. They've seen, goldfishes. But if I start talking about, care for a, let's say a tequila split fin, people may not relate to that as much because they don't know what a tequila split fin is. It's not as common of a fish, but the way you treat them may be identical, but it's that level of confidence from being like, oh yeah, I've seen that before. I'm comfortable with that. And sometimes, having seen the platforms, seen, how the LEDs interact, everything like that, does give you that confidence. And whether that takes place through a physical environment, seeing the device itself, or whether that's augmented reality, where you're putting on something like a Microsoft HoloLens, and now the ICX 7750 is appearing on the desk in front of you, and you can see what the LEDs are doing, things like that. It's taking that it's taking that virtual device and inserting it into your physical world, or doing it in a full VR. Any one of those reacts with our brain the same way.
So basically what I'm hearing is you're against a GoFundMe, but if there's any angel investors or venture capitalists out there, it's an awesome concept. And I think just because we have all this technology out there, the intriguing thing about it and why I enjoy talking to you so much is you can find ways to apply this to what we do. And, you know, I mean, I've told people countless times, I mean, there's people that are good at their jobs and there's people that kind of think outside the box, and there are people that try to put these things together. And there are people that also want to make sure that there's a fun aspect to it. And I think you fit that mold in every way, because if you've ever been in a classroom with you, you know that. And then when you have these conversations with you, you know that as well. Because it's stuff that's out there that exists that can actually be utilized in a way that benefits. I mean, the reality of it is, we talk about live streams. I don't think either one of us have this large nagging desire to be on camera and have people talking to you and be doing this. And like, to me, that's not what it is. I don't have any desire to be the center of attention in that way. I do have a desire, much like yourself, to get information to people, to help them learn something, to either be better at their job that they're doing now, or drive interest in something that they might, you know, kind of be curious about, or just help them solve a problem. I mean, that's really what that comes down to.
Absolutely. Yep. And whether that's for their existing role or whether that's preparing them for something in their future. Yeah. And that's far more rewarding than anything of, you know, being the face that's on there or anything like that. It's being able to enable that moment of someone going, oh, I get it now. You know, being able to be there and see that bulb come on, and not only does that bulb, you know, click on, but it turns all these other gears of the things that are related to it. You know, that sometimes once you understand a kind of fundamental concept that you never really got before, it opens up all these doors of understanding, and being able to enable that no matter what format that's through, whether that is through a YouTube video that someone is, you know, put in the comments that like, wow, this really did it for me. I finally get it, you know, or whether that's in a live stream or whether that's in a physical classroom, whatever venue that's in, that's really the key to me to this role. And, you know, everything else is just tools we can use to try to get to that breakthrough point.
You're spot on. I mean, absolutely spot on. Here's a great example of that. Newer networking engineers have great foundational skills because of the training that they've gone through. Practical application of things that are a little bit more complicated, like multicast, tend to trip them up. And I can't judge them because I was in that boat as well. I mean, I remember being green behind the ear or wet behind the ears and looking at a situation in a prior job that was multicast driven, and I'd never even seen it before. And so I had no idea. So I can totally relate to it. And then, you know, we kind of looked at, okay, well, we have a group of folks that are struggling with multicast. How do we fix that? And we put collateral together and put it in front of them and let them go through it. And at the end of it, you're exactly right. That was the reward. They're like, oh, I totally get it now. And I was like, oh, I feel so much better, you know? So yeah, I think it's nice when you're in a role where there is that reward there, right? It's not just the stick. You have the carrot and you actually get the carrot once.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like the live stream thing. I remember hearing an interview with Bill Murray one time, and he was talking to me, oh man, I want to be rich and famous. And he goes, why don't you just take rich?
Yeah.
Like, leave the fame, just take the wealth. And I was like, that is absolutely right. I'll take that all day long.
Yeah.
Yep. So here's a question. When you look at all of the different things that are out there for streaming, you have overlays, you have cameras, you have audio interfaces, tons. It can get a little overwhelming. Do you see it getting to a point in the near or distant future where things become streamlined down and simpler? And I'm asking you this loaded question because I already know. But right now we rely on hardware a ton. Cameras, key lights, green screens, audio interfaces. Where do you think some of the hardware manufacturers, for like NVIDIA for one, are trying to take this stuff?
I think that as this kind of moves more from the entertainment realm, from the streaming of games and stuff like that, more into, corporations are using this to get out information on, new product releases, and, just for, virtual sit downs with groupings of customers, that kind of stuff. You're far more likely to start seeing more of a stream in a box kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
That may be driven through, kind of a touch interface tablet type of thing, type of setup. That does come with, it's kind of like your conference phone is today, but it's got like the embedded microphones and everything else that's needed for it, kind of, all feeds in through that, and it's more of an out of the box solution rather than pieces and parts and having to learn, 20 different pieces of software and everything else. And that's something that we've tried to do here a lot is, I developed a lot of the scenes and all that kind of stuff, but, we're using tools like the Stream Deck from Elgato to be able to make it where these tools are accessible to someone that is a full-time instructor that doesn't want to become a full-time streamer, that doesn't want to learn how, open broadcast software works, and doesn't want to learn, how to go through and do all of their audio routing, and, just have it as kind of this is a preset. We're going with these pieces of hardware. You install these things, make these changes, and then you're pretty much, you're on autopilot from there. And that's kind of the goal that I've used internally, because, you don't want to have people that specialize in a technology that they're teaching have to devote that much of their mind share to the platform that they're teaching it through.
It's interesting too, because I know the first couple of these that we had done, and I told you this, I went into sensory overload the second I hit stop streaming. And it's just because you get, you have the interaction on the stream, and then you have folks internally pinging you, and then you have other things going on, and my brain just fried. And it probably happened the first one or two times. And I think that's normal of anything you kind of jump into. And I went back and I watched the replay, and I realized, I made this mistake and this mistake and this mistake. And a lot of it is in, the transitional pieces. Because one thing that we're both adamant about, right, is making sure that everything is put together and built cleanly and it looks good. And you have to in this environment, because it's a live stream, it's visual. So when you make it visually aesthetic and visually pleasing, it helps add to that content and make sure that, even if it helps your audience stay engaged, because they see something that looks professional, it looks clean, it's very well done. That helps so much. So we both kind of fall into that. But now you look at things that are coming up within the industry, right? Look at what NVIDIA is doing with RTX.
Yeah.
You've got a situation now to where you can put a virtual green screen behind you. You don't have to have hardware. You don't have to have a green screen.
Yeah. You don't have to have a green screen that's sitting behind you. And it's still important to have good lighting, I would say, but it's not, as critical as it was for making sure you had, consistent lighting across a whole green screen that was behind you to enable a lot of these functions. And, and along those same lines, RTX voice.
Yep.
So versus having to go through and, you've gone through and done a lot of work on, setting up, custom audio profiles to clean out background noise and stuff like that. That, a lot of that is now being AI driven, and just becomes a push button type of thing, and are they getting the same quality that you can go through and make with, applying custom filters and sampling the exact background noise? Okay, maybe not yet, but it's a really long way along that road, just of the beta of what is out there for RTX voice right now. And, I think we're going to continue seeing major leaps within these areas. So, yeah.
Yeah, the audio stuff, there's things you think you're pretty smart at and you can figure out. I've never felt dumber faster trying to deal with an audio mixer that was software. Like, oh my, can I just see a cable and plug something in?
Yeah.
It was awful.
Can you just give me a virtual patch panel where I can actually put virtual cables and see them plug into the back of it? Going back to that same statement we had earlier about have I seen the device? And, yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Yeah. Here's a funny streaming story. So my 10-year-old, he wants to stream and he wanted to hit affiliate and all this. And I said, go for it. Do your thing. Just don't turn it into a job. First of all, you're 10. Have fun with it. That's
yeah. Yep.
So he was using Streamlabs OBS and everything was set up fine. Had a nice cheap free little overlay on there, and he was doing awesome. I mean, I got to give him credit for a 10-year-old. He was really engaged and talking and talking to his audience and everything. And so he comes downstairs one night and he goes, Fortnite won't show up in my stream. And I'm like, what? He's like, it's just a black screen. Okay, so I go up there and look, and this game has given him so many fits I can't even see straight.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So I go up there and look at it, me thinking I'm smart, right? I had to mess with slobs for an hour to get a stream to show up, and it never would. I could not get it to pull the screen capture no matter what I did. I'd try to capture the display. I'd try to capture the actual game window itself. I tried it windowed, full screen, everything. I tried hotkeys, the whole thing. Won't pull it. So I'm like, fine. And I'm running it in administrator, everything else, all the tips that are out there won't work. I'm like, screw this. I was like, you're going to lose your overlay, but I'll just put something up there real quick. Installed OBS, had it up in 3 seconds.
Yeah.
And so I started looking at it, and it's because of all the anti-cheat hooks in there. For some reason, Epic has done something that slobs and Fortin just don't get along. And I'm like, you know what? I do this at work all day. I don't want to do this. Carpenters don't go home from work and build cabinets.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's challenges with it. And, one thing that you noticed right away is you were trying to use slobs to do this, but it had some issues, and there were things that you could build into OBS that worked really well. So, it's just one of those things. You have to play with it and figure out what works and what makes it work the best for you.
Yeah. Yep. And there are a lot of different tools out there, whether it's Streamlabs OBS or XSplit. There are a number of different ones, and there's a number of different reasons to use each of them. We found that OBS happened to be the best one for us to land on, but that may not be the case for other groups, organizations, or individuals, so yeah.
If you're doing a game stream, honestly, if you're just streaming a game, and obviously a game that will allow you to capture the window, and I've figured out after 3 hours of Googling it one night, I finally think I figured it out. But if you're doing a game stream and you have a webcam up and your mic pulled into it and you have a nice overlay and it shows your bits and your followers and subs and things like that, Slobs, I think, does a great job of it, and it brings overlays in really clean. If you're doing something more technical like we're doing, where there is a lot of scene transitions, and especially with, and not even just the live stream, but if you're doing it in a classroom environment where it's virtual instructor led, that's where you found the most success with it, is because those transitions and the way it works, it really cleans it up and makes it.
And not only that, but if you want to create one set of what are called the scenes, which is basically, so for anyone listening that has not seen any of our live streams, a lot of this may make a lot more sense. Go out to youtube.com, go to Ruckus Education, and all the live streams are out there as video on demand, so you can see all the previous ones. Just go through and look at, last week's live stream.
Yep.
And so kind of each screen that it's on is called a scene. And if you want to take what are called those scene collections and share that across a group within an organization, that's one of the other places where OBS becomes much more friendly than some of the other tools, with all of its ability to export very cleanly, import at that in another location very cleanly, and not have people kind of step on top of each other. So, yeah.
Yeah. And it's nice, too, because if you have what we learned, and you probably knew this beforehand, but what we learned was if you have the same hardware, so if you have Your mic doesn't matter because you've got to do, if you're going to do it, there's plugins out there that you can apply to it. But with things like your webcam, you can actually export that entire profile or the scenes like you're talking about and send it over. And if you have the exact same webcam, it pulls it right up. Everything's there. If you don't, you have to mess with it a little bit, but it's really not that much of a challenge. The only other thing at that point is you have to mess with chroma keys and color correction on your green screen, just with those filters. But again, that's something you would want to kind of customize.
But that's something that may, absolutely, because that depends on your lighting and everything else. But that's something that will, potentially go away over the next 6 months to a year as the RTX broadcast engine rolls out and things like that. So,
Right. Yep, exactly. You know what? We're running out of time. We have to be somewhere at 11, don't we?
I believe we do. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Well, if you're interested in doing some of this stuff, my thing would be do it, especially if you have information to get out there, because I enjoy it. I really do enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. And, I think it adds value. So one of the big things that we've looked at, because again, we're having all these conversations internally, but it's around how do people learn and how do you do this? And, one of the driving things behind it that I was thinking about was we can take these how-to videos that are 5 minutes, right? And I use the LDAP authentication one with Zone Director a lot because the recording really was an hour and a half. If you can do that in a live demonstration, the thing that I think gets missing out of the how-to video is all the whoopsies get edited out, right? The random error message that spit out because you clicked on the wrong thing isn't there. If you do a stream in a live demo environment, now you see that. And so the user or the viewer can see like, oh, I got to watch out for that, right? And we edit that stuff.
And a lot of times that has a lot of value too. Yeah.
Yep. And we edit that out just because, time is a factor, right? I don't want to have a 20-minute long video where somebody's going to be skipping through it as often as they can. Then you use chapter markers and you can put in there, oop, watch out for this kind of thing. So yeah, but it's also beneficial.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. We better wrap it up. Brian, I can't thank you enough. We're again soon.
Always a pleasure, my friend.
Appreciate it. Yeah. And like Brian said, youtube.com, you can search for CommScope Ruckus Education. You can search for Ruckus Live. It'll show up. I know we also put this stuff out on social media. Typically, we stream every Wednesday at 11 Mountain. And if you have suggestions, things that you want us to do a live stream on, do a live demonstration of on the stream, send us an email. It's ruckuslive@commscope.com. We absolutely monitor that mailbox, and we'll throw it on the list for sure. Cool. All right, Brian, thanks again. Can't thank you enough for joining me, and we'll do it again soon.
No worries. Have a good one, man.
Awesome. Thanks. You too. All right. Thanks. See you, everybody.
Thank you for listening to Ruckcast. If you just found us for the first time, be sure to follow or subscribe on your platform of choice so you can be notified of future episodes. If you have ideas for future episodes or can't find Ruckcast on your favorite platform, contact us at ruckcast@commscope.com. And as always, thanks for listening.